The family I nanny for has an emergency code, and the kids said it when a car pulled up. I'd been working for the Ashford family for 8 months when Maya first taught me the code. She was 7 years old, sitting at the kitchen counter with her homework spread out, when she looked up and said, "Jenna, do you know about our special word?" Her younger brother, Kai, only 5, immediately shushed her and glanced toward the living room where their mother was on a work call. Maya rolled her eyes and whispered, "Mom already said we could tell you. The word is starfish." She explained that if either of them ever said starfish in a conversation, it meant they felt unsafe and needed help. I asked why they needed such a word, and Maya's expression grew serious. "Sometimes bad people look like good people," she said, sounding far too wise for her age. "Mommy says we have to be extra careful because of her job." Their mother, Dr. Rebecca Ashford, worked as a forensic psychiatrist for the state, evaluating criminals for court cases. I'd always wondered why she seemed so paranoid about security, checking locks twice and installing cameras at every entrance. The house itself felt like a fortress disguised as a family home. Motion sensors lined the driveway, security cameras covered every angle, and Rebecca had given me strict instructions about never opening the door for anyone she hadn't personally cleared. She'd installed a panic room in the basement, stocked with food and water, and showed me the hidden entrance behind a false wall in Kai's closet. At first, I thought she was being overly cautious, but she explained that her work involved evaluating some of the most dangerous criminals in the state, men who blamed her for their convictions, who'd made threats from prison, who had associates on the outside with nothing to lose. She received death threats regularly, forwarded them all to police, and had learned to live with the constant awareness that someone might try to hurt her through her children. The kids had been raised with this reality, taught to recognize danger signs and trust their instincts about people who made them uncomfortable. Every family dinner included casual discussions about situational awareness and what to do if strangers approached them. My first week working for the Ashfords had been an education in high-level security measures. Rebecca showed me the elaborate system she'd installed throughout the house, explaining each component with the thoroughness of someone whose life depended on these precautions. The front door had 3 separate locks plus a digital keypad that required a 6-digit code. Windows on the first floor were reinforced with security film and connected to pressure sensors that would trigger alarms if broken. The garage had its own security system independent from the main house, and Rebecca's car was equipped with a panic button that would summon both police and private security. She'd even installed backup generators to ensure the security systems would function during power outages. Most importantly, she'd established relationships with local police who knew about her situation and prioritized calls from her address. Detective Ray Moreno visited monthly to review the security arrangements and discuss any new threats that had emerged from her casework. The children's daily routines were built around security protocols that most kids never needed to consider. Maya and Kai knew to vary their walking routes between home and the bus stop, never following the same pattern 2 days in a row. They'd been taught to recognize surveillance vehicles and to trust their instincts if adults asked too many questions or seemed overly interested in their family. Their after-school activities were limited to programs with strong security measures, and Rebecca personally vetted every coach, teacher, and volunteer who would have contact with them. Maya had once told me that she felt sorry for other kids who didn't know how to stay safe, as if the elaborate precautions were normal childhood lessons rather than responses to genuine threats. Kai, being younger, sometimes complained about the restrictions, but Maya always reminded him that Mommy's rules kept them protected. Both children carried emergency phones programmed with direct lines to police, Rebecca's office, and a private security firm that Rebecca employed for additional protection. Rebecca's work evaluating violent criminals for the courts had made her intimately familiar with how dangerous people operated and thought. She'd spent years interviewing murderers, rapists, and terrorists, documenting their psychological profiles and advising judges about their potential for rehabilitation or continued violence. Her testimony had sent dozens of dangerous individuals to prison for life, and several had made explicit threats against her and her family. She kept detailed records of every threat, working closely with law enforcement to assess which ones represented credible dangers. The most concerning cases involved criminals with extensive networks of associates who might act on their behalf, seeking revenge for convictions or attempting to intimidate her into changing her professional opinions. Rebecca had explained to me that forensic psychiatrists faced unique risks because their work could determine whether dangerous people remained free or spent their lives behind bars. The morning that changed everything started with Rebecca receiving a call from Detective Moreno at 6:30 a.m. I arrived at my usual time and found her in the kitchen, pacing while she spoke quietly into her phone. Maya and Kai were eating cereal, but I could tell from their subdued behavior that they'd picked up on their mother's anxiety. When Rebecca finished the call, she sat down with the children and explained that one of the men she'd evaluated was on trial this week, and the case was receiving significant media attention. Victor Crane had murdered his ex-wife and her new boyfriend in a jealous rage, and Rebecca's psychiatric evaluation was central to the prosecution's argument for life imprisonment without parole. She'd concluded that Crane was an extreme narcissist with violent tendencies who posed a permanent threat to society. The defense was challenging her evaluation, claiming that Crane could be rehabilitated through intensive therapy. The stakes were enormous because Crane had wealthy family members and business associates who'd already made veiled threats about what would happen if he was convicted. Rebecca's anxiety that morning was palpable as she prepared to leave for court. She triple-checked the security system, reviewed emergency procedures with me again, and made sure both children's phones were fully charged. She'd arranged for additional private security to patrol the neighborhood while she was testifying, though she didn't want the children to know about this precaution. Before leaving, she pulled me aside and said that if anything unusual happened, even something that seemed minor, I should trust my instincts and activate the emergency protocols immediately. She'd rather have a false alarm than take any risks with her children's safety. The Crane case had attracted more attention than most, and Rebecca had been receiving threatening emails and letters for weeks. Some contained specific details about the children's schedules and activities, suggesting that whoever was sending them had been conducting surveillance. Rebecca had forwarded everything to police, but she knew that law enforcement could only do so much to prevent determined criminals from acting. The children seemed more subdued than usual that morning, picking up on their mother's tension despite her attempts to appear normal. Maya asked several questions about why Mommy seemed worried, and Rebecca carefully explained that some people got angry when she helped send bad men to prison. She assured both children that they had excellent security and that I would take good care of them while she was at work. After Rebecca left, I tried to maintain normal routines, helping Maya with her reading homework and playing building blocks with Kai. But I found myself checking the security monitors more frequently than usual, paying attention to every car that drove past the house. The private security patrol wasn't obvious, but I occasionally noticed the same dark SUV making circuits through the neighborhood. Rebecca had given me the contact number for the security team leader, with instructions to call immediately if I noticed anything suspicious. Everything changed on a rainy afternoon in October. I was helping Maya with her math homework while Kai built towers with blocks in the living room. Rebecca was at the courthouse, testifying in a high-profile murder case that had been dominating local news for weeks. She'd evaluated the defendant, a man named Victor Crane who'd killed his ex-wife and her new boyfriend in a jealous rage. Rebecca's testimony was crucial to the prosecution's case, and she'd been receiving more threats than usual. That morning, she'd seemed more anxious than normal, checking the security system 3 times before leaving and reminding me to keep the doors locked and the alarm set. She'd also mentioned that the verdict was expected later that day, and depending on the outcome, things might get more dangerous for our family. I'd asked if she wanted me to take the kids somewhere else, but she said they were safest at home with all the security measures in place. The house had become their fortress, and leaving would expose them to unknown variables that couldn't be controlled. The rain had been falling steadily since morning, creating a gray, oppressive atmosphere that seemed to match the tension we were all feeling. Maya was struggling with her multiplication problems, frustrated and easily distracted. Kai had built and demolished the same block tower several times, unable to focus on sustained play. I'd made their favorite snacks and put on a cheerful movie, but nothing seemed to lift the mood that had settled over the house. Around 2 o'clock, I received a text from Rebecca saying that her testimony was going well, but the defense attorney was being particularly aggressive in his cross-examination. She expected to be finished by 4 o'clock, after which the jury would begin deliberations. The verdict could come as early as that evening, though complex cases sometimes took days to decide. I responded that everything was fine at home, and that the kids were looking forward to her return. I didn't mention my growing sense of unease or the fact that I'd been checking the security cameras obsessively for the past hour. Around 3:30, while I was in the kitchen making snacks, Maya suddenly appeared beside me. "Jenna," she said quietly, "I saw a starfish at the beach yesterday, and it was really pretty." My blood went cold because I knew exactly what she meant. I looked out the kitchen window and saw what had spooked her. A black sedan with tinted windows parked across the street, engine running. The car hadn't been there 20 minutes ago when I'd looked out while cleaning up lunch. More concerning, it was parked in a spot that provided a clear view of our front door and driveway, while remaining partially hidden behind a large oak tree. I immediately called Rebecca, but her phone went straight to voicemail. Court was still in session, and she always turned off her phone during proceedings. I texted her instead. "Emergency. Strange car outside. Kids use the code." Then I gathered both children and explained calmly that we needed to go downstairs and play a special game in the basement. Maya understood immediately, but Kai started to whine about leaving his blocks. I picked him up and carried him downstairs, Maya following close behind with her backpack and his favorite stuffed animal. The basement panic room was more sophisticated than I'd realized. Rebecca had installed it after receiving her first death threat 2 years ago, and it contained everything needed for a siege: reinforced walls, independent air circulation, emergency supplies, and a separate phone line that couldn't be cut from outside. Most importantly, it had monitors connected to every security camera around the house, giving us a complete view of the property. I locked the heavy door behind us and activated the system, watching the monitors as the black sedan remained motionless across the street. The car's position was strategic, allowing its occupants to observe our house while having quick access to multiple escape routes. For 20 minutes, nothing happened. The kids settled into the corner with books and quiet toys, understanding that this wasn't a game despite my attempts to keep them calm. Then the sedan's doors opened and 3 men got out. They weren't dressed like typical criminals. They wore business suits and moved with professional confidence. but something about their coordination and the way they scanned the neighborhood felt predatory. One stayed with the car, while the other two walked directly toward our front door. I watched the monitors as the two men approached the house, noting how they split up to cover different angles of approach. One went to the front door while the other disappeared around the side, heading toward the back entrance. They moved like they'd done this before, like they'd planned every step. The man at the front door didn't knock or ring the bell. Instead, he pulled out some kind of tool and began working on the lock. On another monitor, I could see his partner doing the same thing at the back door. These weren't random criminals or impulsive attackers seeking revenge. This was a coordinated break-in by professionals who knew exactly what they were doing and had probably been watching the house for days. I tried calling 911, but the basement's thick walls interfered with cell service. The landline in the panic room was working, though, and I dialed emergency services while keeping my eyes on the monitors. The dispatcher assured me that police were on the way, but I knew these men would be inside the house long before help arrived. Rebecca's security system was impressive, but it was designed to delay intruders, not stop determined professionals with the right tools and training. Both locks gave way simultaneously, confirming that this was a well-planned operation. The men entered through separate doors and immediately began searching the house with systematic efficiency. They didn't ransack rooms or steal obvious valuables. They moved through each space methodically, checking closets and behind furniture, clearly looking for people rather than property. One man headed straight for the stairs leading to the bedrooms while the other remained on the main floor, blocking potential exit routes. They carried weapons, but held them professionally rather than waving them around. Everything about their behavior suggested military or law enforcement training. On the monitor, I watched the first man enter Maya's room and begin searching it thoroughly, looking under the bed and in the closet. When he found nothing, he moved to Kai's room and repeated the process. They were hunting for the children, and it was only a matter of time before they found the panic room entrance. Rebecca's assumption that the hidden room would provide ultimate safety was about to be tested by people who clearly knew how to find hidden spaces. Maya tugged on my shirt and whispered, "Where's Mommy?" I told her that Mommy was safe at work, and that police were coming to help us. Kai had gone completely silent, clutching his stuffed elephant and watching my face for clues about how scared he should be. On the monitors, I could see that the searchers had finished checking the bedrooms and were now examining the basement access. The main basement door was locked, but these men had already demonstrated their ability to bypass home security. I realized with growing horror that the panic room might not be as secure as Rebecca had believed. If these were professionals, they might know about hidden safe rooms and how to find them. I started looking around our confined space for anything that could be used as a weapon if they breached our defenses. The room contained emergency supplies, but nothing that would help 3 civilians fight off trained attackers. Rebecca had focused on hiding and waiting for rescue, but she hadn't considered what would happen if the hiding place was discovered before help arrived. The sound of footsteps on the basement stairs made all 3 of us freeze. Heavy boots moving slowly, deliberately, pausing every few steps. Whoever was down there was being careful, taking time to examine every detail. The monitors showed one man at the top of the stairs providing cover while his partner descended. They'd found the basement access quickly, suggesting they'd studied the house plans in advance. The footsteps reached the bottom and began moving across the concrete floor, getting closer to our hidden location. Maya grabbed my hand and squeezed tightly, while Kai pressed against my other side. We could hear the searcher examining the basement systematically, opening storage containers and checking behind equipment. Rebecca had designed the panic room entrance to be virtually invisible, hidden behind a false wall that looked identical to the rest of the basement structure. But professional criminals often had experience with these kinds of hiding places. The footsteps grew closer, and I could hear the man testing different sections of the wall, looking for hollow sounds or other indicators of hidden space. My phone suddenly buzzed with a text message from Rebecca. Verdict guilty. Crane's associates making threats. Are you safe? I wanted to respond that we definitely weren't safe, that armed men were in her house hunting for her children, but I was afraid to make any sound that might give away our location. The searcher in the basement had moved closer to our hiding spot, and was now examining the wall that concealed our entrance. I could hear him tapping on different sections, listening for hollow sounds that would indicate a hidden space. Modern panic rooms were designed to be undetectable, but this man seemed to know what he was looking for. His tapping grew more focused, concentrating on the area directly around our concealed door. Maya looked at me with wide, terrified eyes, understanding that our safety was about to be compromised. I motioned for both children to move to the far corner of the room, as far from the entrance as possible. The sound of methodical tapping continued, each tap bringing the searcher closer to discovering our location. The tapping stopped suddenly, replaced by a different sound. Metal against metal, like tools being assembled. Through the monitors, I could see that both intruders were now in the basement, working together on something just outside the camera's range. One had produced a device that looked like a small drill or cutting tool, while the other kept watch. They'd found our hiding place and were preparing to breach it. I realized that Rebecca's expensive security system had failed to protect us when it mattered most. These weren't random criminals acting on impulse. They were professionals who'd studied the house, planned their approach, and brought the right tools to overcome whatever defenses they encountered. The children and I were trapped with no way out and no weapons to defend ourselves. All we could do was wait for them to break through and hope that police would arrive in time to save us. The cutting sound began immediately, a high-pitched whine that made all three of us cover our ears. They were using some kind of power tool to cut through the reinforced door, working steadily despite the noise. It would take them several minutes to breach the entrance completely, but once they succeeded, we'd be completely helpless. I tried the phone again and reached the 911 dispatcher, whispering that armed intruders had found our panic room and were cutting through the door. She assured me that multiple units were responding, but the nearest patrol car was still at least 5 minutes away. The cutting continued relentlessly, and I could see sparks flying as their tool bit through the metal reinforcement. Maya started crying quietly, and I pulled both children closer, trying to shield them from whatever was about to happen. The sound of sirens in the distance provided a moment of hope, but the cutting continued, and our captors seemed undeterred by the approaching police. They worked with the focused efficiency of people accustomed to completing their missions under pressure, and I realized they probably had escape routes planned that would allow them to disappear before law enforcement could establish a perimeter. A section of the door suddenly fell inward with a crash, creating a jagged opening large enough for a person to climb through. One of the men immediately stuck his arm through the hole, feeling around for the internal locking mechanism. His face appeared in the opening moments later, scanning our small room with cold, professional assessment. He saw me with the 2 children and called out to his partner, "Found them." 3 subjects, no resistance. The other man appeared beside him and began working to enlarge the opening enough for easy access. They worked quickly but methodically, showing no signs of panic despite the sirens getting louder outside. These were men accustomed to working under pressure, completing their objectives even when law enforcement was closing in. I realized they intended to take the children and escape before police could establish a perimeter around the house. The sirens were close now, maybe 2 blocks away, but these professionals had timed their operation to allow for extraction, even if authorities responded quickly. The opening was now large enough for the first man to climb through. He entered our safe room with his weapon drawn, motioning for us to move away from the damaged door. His partner remained outside, presumably watching for police or preparing their escape route. The man inside was tall and lean, with the kind of controlled demeanor I associated with military contractors or professional bodyguards. He looked at the children with calculating eyes, as if assessing their value as hostages or leverage. "You're coming with us," he said calmly, addressing Maya and Kai directly. "Your mother has something we need, and you're going to help us get it." Maya shrank behind me, while Kai started crying openly. I stepped protectively in front of both children and told the man he'd have to go through me first. He smiled coldly and raised his weapon, making it clear that he had no problem removing obstacles to his mission. The sirens were very loud now, and I could hear vehicles screeching to stops outside the house. Police sirens were now very close, and the second man called down urgently from outside the panic room. 2 minutes to extraction. Move now." The armed man in our room grabbed Maya's arm, pulling her toward the damaged entrance despite her struggles. She screamed and tried to break free, while Kai reached for his sister in panic. I lunged forward and grabbed the man's wrist, trying to force him to release Maya. He backhanded me across the face with enough force to send me stumbling, but I recovered quickly and threw myself at him again. This time he struck me with the butt of his weapon, sending stars across my vision and dropping me to the floor. Maya screamed louder as he dragged her toward the exit, while Kai tried to follow his sister despite his terror. The sound of police cars in the driveway meant help was finally arriving, but these men had planned for this contingency and weren't giving up. Heavy boots thundered across the floor above us as officers forced entry into the house through multiple access points. Heavy footsteps thundered through the house above us as police officers forced entry through multiple doors. The second attacker called down that they had less than a minute before law enforcement reached the basement. The man holding Maya pushed her through the damaged opening and prepared to lift her up to his partner. I forced myself to stand despite my injuries and made one final desperate attempt to stop them. I grabbed Maya's legs as she was being pulled through the opening, holding on with everything I had. The armed man cursed and struck me again, but I refused to let go of the child. Maya was screaming for help. Kai was crying hysterically, and the sound of police officers searching the house was getting louder. For a moment, it felt like I might actually be strong enough to prevent them from taking her. The man outside was pulling Maya upward while I held onto her legs, creating a terrifying tug-of-war with a 7-year-old child as the rope. The situation changed instantly when police voices echoed down the basement stairs. "Armed subjects in the basement! Repeat, armed subjects in basement!" The 2 attackers looked at each other and made a rapid decision. The one holding Maya released her suddenly, and she dropped back into the panic room. Both men began retreating toward whatever exit route they'd planned, abandoning their mission now that law enforcement had arrived in force. I pulled Maya and Kai behind me as police officers appeared at the damaged entrance to our hiding place, weapons drawn and ready for combat. The attackers had vanished, escaping through some predetermined route that avoided the main police response. Officer Lisa Valdez was the first to reach us, immediately checking for injuries while calling for paramedics. The children clung to me as more officers secured the basement and began pursuing the suspects who had somehow disappeared despite being surrounded. Within minutes, the basement was filled with law enforcement personnel documenting the scene and trying to understand how professional criminals had breached such sophisticated security measures. Detective Ray Moreno arrived while paramedics were treating the cut on my forehead and checking the children for trauma. He explained that this had been a coordinated kidnapping attempt targeting Rebecca's family in retaliation for her testimony in the Crane trial. Victor Crane had been found guilty of double murder just hours earlier and sentenced to life in prison without parole. His associates had apparently planned to take the children as leverage to force Rebecca to recant her testimony or face appeals. The three attackers had escaped through a network of storm drains that connected to the next neighborhood, demonstrating the sophisticated planning behind the operation. Detective Moreno said this was far from over, that Crane's people would likely try again unless the entire network was dismantled. Rebecca arrived home 30 minutes later, having been escorted by federal marshals from the courthouse when threats against her family escalated. Her face was pale with terror as she rushed to embrace her children, and I could see the guilt in her eyes as she realized that her dedication to justice had put them in mortal danger. The reunion between Rebecca and her children was heartbreaking and beautiful simultaneously. She held them both for long minutes, crying and checking them over repeatedly for any signs of harm. Maya told her mother how I'd fought to protect them, and Rebecca thanked me with tears in her eyes. But her relief was tempered by the realization that their home was no longer safe, that determined enemies had breached every security measure she'd installed. Detective Moreno explained that the family would need to enter witness protection immediately, relocating to a secure location while federal agents worked to arrest the remaining members of Crane's criminal network. Rebecca looked around the house she'd worked so hard to make secure and nodded grimly. Her career of putting dangerous people in prison had finally caught up with her family, and there was no choice but to disappear until the threat was neutralized. The children's toys, their artwork on the refrigerator, their familiar bedrooms, all of it would have to be left behind for an uncertain future in hiding. 2 weeks later, I received a postcard with no return address, showing a lighthouse on a rocky coast. On the back, in Maya's careful handwriting, were the words, "The starfish are beautiful here, and Kai learned to swim. Thank you for protecting us. Love, M and K." I kept that postcard on my refrigerator for months, wondering if they were truly safe or if they'd spend the rest of their lives looking over their shoulders. Rebecca had dedicated her career to justice, evaluating criminals and helping courts make informed decisions about dangerous people. But justice came with a price that her children shouldn't have had to pay. Every time I looked at that postcard, I thought about Maya's courage in using the code word when danger arrived, and how a 7-year-old's quick thinking had probably saved all our lives. 6 months later, Detective Moreno called to tell me that federal agents had arrested the last members of Crane's network, and that the threat against the Ashford family had been neutralized. Rebecca and the children were finally free to return to normal life, though they'd chosen to remain in their new location rather than come back to painful memories. Maya was thriving in her new school. Kai had made friends with neighbor kids, and Rebecca had taken a position with the state attorney general's office that involved less direct contact with violent criminals. The emergency code that had saved their lives that day was no longer needed, but Maya still used the word starfish in letters she sent me, a private reminder of the day we'd faced danger together and survived. Sometimes the most important lessons come from the smallest voices, and Maya had taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's knowing what to do when fear arrives at your door. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.